Aloha and welcome to Your Heart Magic, an illuminating space where psychology, spirituality and heart wisdom meet. Here's your host, Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright, the clinical psychologist with a mystic mind.
Aloha, everybody. Welcome to Your Heart Magic. This is Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright, and today we are doing an Akashic Records energy update, where I am going to be sharing a little bit of what the energy is in the Akashic Records at this time and looking at an overview of the year 2023. Where have things been? Where are they at right now? And what might we expect as we prepare to move into a new year in 2024? We're going into our last quarter of the year. So it's all things Akashic today, and I want to keep this fun and interesting. I find it edifying to look at the energies from the perspective of the records, because they always have a unique point of view to interpret the current energies with. And I've been working with the Akashic Records for quite a while now, from definitely the year 2016 as a reader, and prior to that, where I was receiving readings. And specifically for collective energies, I've been opening the records up for the last several years and bringing through, like, what is the energy for the collective at this time. And something that I really discovered in my work with the Akashic Records is the information truly does come from such a loving place and such a place of giving guidance to support us in living our best lives. And by best lives, what I mean by that is being our most authentic version of self, learning to be our most grounded version of self, finding ways to be our most healed and most whole version of ourselves, and understanding that those things are always a work in progress. This whole human journey as a soul is not about perfection. It is about learning and collecting experiences and making progress as we go. And in the course of our lifetime, we hope to have many highs and milestones and feel a sense of purpose, and like we are contributing and creating a legacy of light to gift to those around us. At the same time, I think we have to have a really good sense of humor about this process and a really good understanding that as much as many of us aspire to do these beautiful things, we are really here to grow as a soul and to have new experiences and to experience love and experience ourselves in new ways and to make a positive contribution to the light. So I think we need a perspective that is from the ground and kind of what we're working on in our tangible reality. And I think spiritually, it's helpful to have a higher perspective and to have that bigger picture perspective of what this journey is all about. And something that I really appreciate about the Akashic Records is they do this beautiful job of blending those wisdoms and bringing higher wisdom through in a way that always feels applicable and approachable, and in a way that I think can support us in moving ourselves forward and communicating our best expression as self in this world. Something that I have found in my work with the records is the way that I think about this information is that it kind of comes from the top down. And what I mean by that is often when I'm entering the records and bringing the information through, I feel like I am opening up to, we'll call it the higher realms, if you want to think of it like that, and really kind of connecting with the angels and higher guidance, and then taking that wisdom and bringing it through for how do we apply this right here, right now. And that's what I mean from the top down. I feel often my experience energetically is I'm reaching up to like grab onto these tidbits of wisdom and pulling them down and really trying to anchor them into, so what does that mean for our experience here? And my hope is that it presents the wisdom in a way that truly does feel applicable to our journeys. Having said that, I think that talking about, like, so what was the year 2023 all about according to the records, and knowing that we're still very much in that energy. The records called this last year the evolution of the light. That was a theme I was given for 2023 when I went into the records back in December of 2022 and opened them up for January, the upcoming month, and for the year ahead. And I have returned to the records throughout the year to kind of do a check-in with what's the energy at this time? What do we need to know about the evolution of the light? So I thought it might be kind of fun today to start with this general overview of, well, what is that theme all about? And what were some of the things that the records have been saying we might expect in the year that we're now experiencing, and kind of go month to month of what were some of the monthly messages, what are the take-home points, and then look at what might be coming for us as we move into the end of the year. So the evolution of the light, I think this is such an interesting concept because we are the light, the light being expressed through each one of us who is trying to cultivate the qualities in this world of beauty and truth and joy and light and goodness and integrity and authenticity, and just really anybody who relates to this idea of being here to be a positive contribution to humanity at this time. We really embody the light, and we embody the change, and we embody helping move and evolve our earth forward at this time. Like, we are the light and the hope that we have been looking for. At the same time, having said that, there has been so much spiritual support that has been coming through and supporting us and assisting us and emboldening us. Always, this is not a one-time thing, but, specifically for the year 2023, when I look into this idea of the evolution of the light, it feels twofold. It feels like it's us evolving ourselves and our light path. And from a spiritual point of view and an energetic point of view, it feels like there has been quite a bit going on behind the scenes. And I suspect that many people this year have had various forms of spiritual awakenings, that they have had increased intuition and perhaps some form of an intuitive or spiritual experience where an individual might feel like their abilities might be growing, or they might feel like they are having a greater sense of connection to the divine and to their understanding of the mysteries. I think that if we were to do a poll, we might find that there's more people who might be accessing something like this podcast, where I'm talking about the Akashic Records, which for a lot of people is still a really esoteric concept and a very metaphysical one. There's lots of different podcasts on the background of, like, what are the records? A lot of Q&A that I've done. I will try and link some of those in the bio write-up section of this if you're new to the records and you're just wanting to know a little bit more. But I suspect that there's a lot more people who are stumbling across something like the Akashic Records, or some form of a spiritual path, or who are maybe being drawn to something astrological or an energy forecast or tracking the moon cycles or something that's a little bit more mystical. And maybe they always had a bit of an interest in that and they've had an increased interest, or maybe there's some people who are stepping into it and it's new to them. And they used to think this stuff was really weird or out there. And they started to have some experiences that fell outside the bounds of how they were thinking about reality. And so now they're curious and they're wanting to educate themselves and learn more and to grow more and to develop a greater, more transpersonal relationship with the world around them and just open up to what might be out there, and what might some of the interpretations be of some of these intangible energies that I might be experiencing. And I think that evolution of the light is this dance between us and our development. Cosmic energies that are coming onto the planet at this time, things that are happening in the greater cycles, the greater collective of humanity, with how humanity is evolving and structures are evolving or maybe devolving and deconstructing so they can be reconstructed to a greater evolution. And I think all of it is working together to move us forward at this point in time. And just to really break down a concept like evolution of the light. I love that phrase. It sounds like a poem. It sounds like something that I want to write about as a writer and do a prose piece on it. But it also sounds very esoteric. And so to make it tangible, we are evolving. Our world right now, as we understand it, is so different than how it was 5 years ago. It is different than how it was 10 years ago. And I think the world has always been in a state of evolution, though I do think now with our access to technology that we are more connected to the rapid rate that information is flowing. And we are more aware than ever just how quickly things are changing. And so we are seeing that evolution happen before our very eyes. And as those who might identify as light workers, those who are here to, serve from our heart, to communicate love, to be a light for this world, our hope is that this evolution continues in service to the light, and that we continue to create a better space and a better planet, obviously, for humanity. We got a lot of work to do. I know this, but I think that's what this year has all been about. And if you think about evolution from just kind of a construct of what that word even means, it is about a transmutation, a change in something. And we know that when something is evolving, it's not always pretty, that it's not a neat process. Childbirth is not a neat process. It is a messy process. The creative process tends to be a messy process. Things have to go through a space of chaos and disorganization and often falling apart so that new room can be made for something else to enter and for things to reorganize and repattern themselves. And we have been seeing this in our world for a while now. But if you're looking around you sometimes and just shaking your head and thinking, what is going on? There's many ways that we can understand the world at this time. But one of the things that I have always found helpful is just understanding that often things do fall apart in order to come together in a new way. And that when we are evolving something and we're bringing new energy in, there's always a release, there's death to the old way of being. And so I think we're seeing that in some of the upheaval and chaos and some of the dysfunction that we currently see in our world. At the same time, there is so much room for new possibility right now, and so much room for new light and new ways of being. That is the gift when we have a disruption to any daily stream of consciousness, that when things are disrupted, as they've been, those disruptions tend to be really uncomfortable. Uncertainty makes us very uncomfortable on the human journey. At the same time, when we are in a space of uncertainty and disruption, it creates room for a new consciousness to enter. That is how we learn to look at something differently. Isn't it that saying about necessity being the mother of invention? I probably misquoted that, but I think that's the gist of it. And it's this idea that we're in a place of needing to reinvent something, of needing to find a bigger way of being. That is when new breakthrough comes through. Breakthrough comes after the breakdown. So all of those ideas, I think, very much are encompassed in this idea of the year 2023 and the evolution of the light. And something that the record said back in end of December, early January, when I was first feeling into this theme for us, was that where we're at by the end of the year will be very different than where we're starting from. And my understanding of that is for some individuals, that is a very literal interpretation where perhaps they moved this year or life took them in an entirely new direction than they expected to go. And they switched jobs, relocated, changed relationships, went through some sort of massive transition in their life. For others, I think it might be more internal with how they understand themselves and who they are, and then how they might feel called to express that has really shifted. And so some people might look at themselves and say, my gosh, I have changed so much since January, and I'm leaving this year an entirely different person than who I was when I began it. I think we're going to see this too collectively and in some of the structures. And when we look at things that are happening in the news or happening in the collective, and we say, my gosh, I never would have imagined a reality that produced this, whatever it is that it's produced. I think all of these are examples of this big shift of being in a really different place than what we expected. So we know that change was promised to us this year. And we have been riding the waves of that change off and on since the beginning of the year. And something that was really interesting is that I actually sat down and in preparation for this podcast, and I went through and I looked at the monthly messages that I have brought through from the Akashic Records. I think many who listen to this might know this, but if you don't know this, I have a monthly newsletter. It's called Akashic Magic. And it is a newsletter where every month, it's just a letter that goes out to anybody who's subscribed with the link to my website. And on it, at the beginning of the month, is posted the monthly message from the records. And there is a transcription and an audio recording of the channeling, like as it is when I go into the records and ask the questions about what's the energy for the month ahead. How is it going to show up? How can we navigate it? Anything else that we need to know? Always the same questions, always different answers depending on the month. And so I went in and I actually tracked the themes that each month has brought, and want to touch base on each of those today because they are so educational, I think. And going back, I got something from just looking at what was the theme. So I'm just going to do a little energy update to rejog everybody's memory, or maybe introduce you to this for the first time. So the month of January, we were told that the theme was ready to go. And the energy of January had a lot of momentum. It had a lot of urgency to it, almost like we had a rest over the holidays of 2022 and a sense of being idle. And I just felt like we'd been shot out of a cannon or something starting in January. And the encouragement from the records was to treat the first few months of the year like a pilot episode of a television series. I love this metaphor so much because if you have ever had a beloved series that you have followed for like multiple seasons, and you go back and you watch the very beginning pilot episode, if it's a great show, it's a good pilot episode. If it's an okay show, a lot of times the pilot episode is awful. And oftentimes it's a little bit of both, where you can tell the actors are still finding the character. It hasn't quite hit that stride that it gets to by the end of the first season, let alone seasons 2 and 3. The pilot episode, often it might be when they make changes to how they're doing things. Sometimes we'll go back and watch the first episode of something and be like, oh my gosh, this was good, but the show got so much better as it went on. Sometimes they'll write a character out or bring somebody new in, probably based on testing out how does it do. So we were really encouraged to think of the first few months of the year like a pilot episode. And as we approach things with this like hit the ground running energy, to also have fun with it and treat it like an experiment, and know that we are lining ourselves up for where we're at right now with some of the things that we were working on in our lives, but we weren't necessarily, should not expect ourselves to like get it right from the beginning, that we are here in a process and we have to be mindful of that process and have a little bit of a sense of humor about what we are growing and developing in our lives, and a little bit of a learning curve, and just knowing that when we're starting something for the first time, we're not an expert, we are a beginner. And so there was a lot of encouragement to treat that time like we were beginning, and to be gracious with ourselves and give ourselves a lot of room to grow over the course of this year. February was called Puzzle Pieces in Place. And it was a much more grounded energy, where it felt like after this like urgency and launching of January, that there would be a little bit more of a groundedness and just seeing some things come together. There was an encouragement to like just take the small next step in front of you. March was all about point of view. That was the theme for the month. And I remember this one vividly because the records opened feeling like I was sitting on an airplane going through turbulence. And I remember thinking, oh my, like that's not a message I want to bring through for everybody. But what was really beautiful about that message is the focal point was on, you're in the airplane, and yes, there's turbulence going on around you, but like you're safe, you're buckled in, like nothing's going to happen. And one of the focal points that the records have brought through in multiple messages and kind of multiple forms, in the time I've been doing these collective messages, is this emphasis that our spiritual connection, and our spiritual connection, meaning whatever it is that anchors you. We all might have a little bit of a definition of that is slightly different based on what we believe, but our connection to our heart, our connection to perhaps Mother Nature, to the earth, our connection to our sense of the divine, our sense of the mysteries, however specific or non-specific that is, our connection to whatever feels like higher power to us. That all of those things are what helps give us a sense of being buckled in turbulence. And when we're seeing the world around us do the crazy thing that the world is going to do, where there's always something happening. There are so many energies going on. There's conflict going on. There's catastrophe going on. There's all these things happening that break our hearts. Sometimes we're a bystander and we're watching it happen, thinking, how can I help? Sometimes it's happening to us and we feel like we're part of that mix at that time. And we really relate to other people going through something similar, but that what allows us to stay buckled in is our spiritual connection. And that is what allows us to stay in our heart wisdom. It's what allows us to choose a better way and to stay anchored and grounded. It is really our why, and our what we're about in this world is this connection to whatever is higher for us, whatever our sense of purpose is. And if you're still trying to find that out for yourself, that's fine. I just offer the exhortation to stay with yourself on this and continue to find that for you, because it is what will allow you to feel anchored when the world around you feels like it is spinning out of control. And that's a little bit how the energy felt back in March, was all this turbulence, all this movement. And we were encouraged to play with point of view that month. And instead of being in it, try and see our circumstances from the observer's point of view. Try and see it from the point of view of, when I say our opponent, I mean, if you were having friction in a relationship that month, how might the person that you were having conflict with, how might the opposing point of view see it? How might a point of view see it if you were to look at it as a sort of from an unconditional loving point of view? How would your wise self see it? And then how would maybe the part of you see it that's trying to figure out your boundaries, your path forward? If something upsets us or wounds us, how does our point of view from the wounded self or the anxiety mind see it? And what was so beautiful about the wisdom is there was no guidance on this is the right point of view and these ones are the bad ones. it was just this open invitation to play with this idea of perspective and to play with this idea of widening our perspective. And again, I'll probably sound like a broken record, but I love how the records take higher perspective and make it applicable, because I've actually found this to be like beautiful life advice. It might have been the message for March, but it's applicable anytime, no matter what we're going through. It's always an interesting thing to try and look at it from different points of views. And if we're struggling with something in our life, to give ourselves the space to look at it from the point of view of being in the wound, of being in the fear-based self, being in the anxiety, and then trying to look at it from our wiser self perspective, and maybe trying to look at it from spirit's perspective and from even higher perspective. I think that is what allows us to continue to expand our mindset, expand our consciousness, and grow perspectives that transcend a moment and help us stay connected to a more grounded perspective when we're going through some of the struggles and challenges in our life. So after all this turbulence in March, April's energy was called New Horizon. And it's kind of like that airplane had landed by then. Some of that big changes and shifts were done. And April felt like a sense of new space opening up. And there was a sense of anticipation that month of something to come. And then May was a build on that. And if April was the month of anticipating and seeing what was on the horizon, May was the month that was called Earth Movement and Personal Power. And it was a month of stepping into our power and stepping into whatever it was that felt like this kind of new territory that we were finding ourselves in. And it was a sense of us coming into our power during the month of May. Something really beautiful that came through in May's message is the records talked about forgiving spirit and forgiving the records and forgiving this world. When we find ourselves in a situation where we feel like we have done everything that we knew to do and life just did not go the way that we expected. And the records really in May kind of address this, what I personally feel is a wound for many of us and a hang up that many of us have, especially in the spiritual community, where oftentimes we'll feel like we're doing everything right. And we are listening to our guidance the best we know how. We're doing our meditative work, our inner work, whatever it is that we understand that would help us say, like, I am in coherence with my heart right now. I feel like I'm really aligned. And then it's like life tips sideways and you're like, what is going on? Or you followed your heart into something and truly believed that you were heeding that guidance. And it really felt like spirit led. You were really doing the work of trying not to listen to your ego and all of that stuff and just like trying to be very heart centered. And it just all goes south. It doesn't go as you expected. And so you're kind of left thinking like, oh my gosh, did I miss some signs? Did I do something wrong? Like, how did I end up here? And the records talked about this idea that can we just forgive this bigger process of life in those moments? And can we understand that so many of us truly are doing what we know to do? And sometimes we maybe draw an experience into us because we are still learning and growing, and we needed that experience. But a lot of times, I think it helps us to understand that we are moving through the world right now within these bigger collective cycles happening. There are these cycles that are happening in the tangible world with our different governments, economic cycles, social change, political upheaval, whatever's trending right now in the collective norms and cultural norms and some of those cultural cycles. We are moving through cosmic cycles and bigger planetary transits and things that might be happening from more of a, we'll say, galactic perspective, if you want to think of it like that. There's spiritual cycles going on right now, and some things I think happening behind the scenes and happening from a spiritual point of view. There's earth cycles happening and earth change that's going on right now. And Mother Earth is certainly going through a lot of realignment and upheaval, and things happening with climate change right now. And so there was this encouragement to understand that there's a timing to all of this. And so sometimes we might be trying to manifest our very best life, and we feel like we're doing everything, and it's just not happening in the way that we thought. And the records were like, blame the cycles. I don't think they used the word blame. I actually think they might have said, no, that's not true. I actually think they said blame us. And then they just said, like, kind of forgive the cycles. You have to understand that you are operating in this bigger context. And that is really what the evolution of the light is all about, is realizing that you're not evolving your life and your path in like this chamber where you're cut off from everything. It is happening in this beautiful cosmic weave and dance along with like all the souls you're connected to, all the things you agreed on a soul level that you came here to do, and all those bigger cycles that you are a part of. This is not happening in a vacuum. It's happening in this greater composition and this greater alchemy. And so when we think about what does it mean to grow our light and evolve our light, for many of us, we can save a lot of frustration on the path where we might be tempted to beat ourselves up or be overly conscientious and think that somehow we got it wrong. Or we followed our guidance the best we knew how, and it's not happening yet, whatever it is, whatever that represents to you. And just understand that our evolution is very much connected to everything happening around us. And there are multiple working pieces in this. And I think seeing that bigger picture serves us, because so often we have our experience of self. So even if we are other-centered and heart-centered and are conscious of other people in this world, part of our spiritual responsibility is also ourself. It's not to be selfless to the point of having no self and no ego. For many of us, I think unless we're called to some path of, I guess, enlightenment and a spiritual path that is maybe about being selfless, I think for many of us, it might resonate more to say, no, we're actually here to embody our fullest expression of self and to be our truest self, to be our most authentic self. The dreams that were put in your heart were put there by spirit. They are there for a reason. And you are going to feel called to bring them out into this world in a way that feels joyful and in a way that feels in alignment with your soul path and like you're serving your soul purpose. And so a lot of times, because we get very fixated on ourself and our journey and understanding our guidance, and that's okay. That's how it should be. So we can try and be our brightest self. We can sometimes over attribute this amount of responsibility, like somehow we're getting it wrong if we're not doing things in a way that we feel like they should be happening. And the guidance in May was take a step back and take a big, deep breath. And remember, there's many cycles going on around you. Get some perspective. You are part of all of these greater cycles, and forgive the cycles, blame spirit, if you will, and forgive yourself. And just learn to be at peace and be open and be curious with where you're at. So moving into June, we were told to turn the lights on is what the theme was. I love that theme. And I remember when I opened the records for June, I heard the song, It's Going to Be a Bright, Bright, Sunshiny Day. I can see clearly now, the rain is gone. And there was almost this sense of like all this light pouring in and feeling connected to a greater web of light and a greater web of light workers and others who might be operating from a space of heart-based consciousness. And it felt like in June, we might actually make more of those connections, whether we met new tribe members or had an experience where we realized, like, I'm not alone in this. I am connected to more than just myself. And there was just a real big sense of building on that personal power from May and having this new light and new clarity that was coming in. And that moved us into the month of July, which was called Revolutions. And what was interesting about July's energy is the record said that we were moving into a new cycle. Now, this timed with the North Node and the South Node shifting into new signs. And when the nodes shift into new signs, which happens astrologically about every 18-ish months or so, it usually does represent a new karmic cycle with new themes and lessons that are going to be coming up. At least it represents that astrologically. And I don't look at the records from an astrological point of view, but it is really fun to have some knowledge of astrology and to see when the records sync with what might be happening in the greater transits, which they almost always do. It's uncanny how often I might not even know what's happening because I've forgotten like what is going on in the astro world. And I'll do the records message, and then I will look at the upcoming astrology for the month ahead and be like, oh, wow, this was talking about the exact same thing from different perspectives. And so there was this sense of stepping into a new cycle in July, and it was interesting energy. It almost felt like the end of the year to me, and the kind of energy I'll feel when we're wrapping things down in December and getting ready to step into something new, except it was happening in the middle of the year. August was called Heightened Intuition. And remember earlier at the beginning of this, when I said that I often feel like when I'm working with the records that I'm bringing information like top down, where I'm reaching upwards and drawing information and bringing it down and hopefully sharing it in a way that feels really applicable and grounded. That is almost always how the information comes through. And August was a shift where it felt like bottom up is how it felt. And it might be the first time I've opened the records where instead of feeling like this higher wisdom was coming through in a way that kind of came down and trickled down to where we're at on the ground level, instead, I saw everybody looking up and I saw our hearts opening upwards. And I had this sense of almost as if our energies were being directed up. And there was a sense of a lot of spiritual light coming into fruition that month, a lot of awareness and spiritual awareness that might be happening for people. I would not be surprised if people had some pretty mystical experiences in the month of August, or at least maybe a seed that was planted that translated to mystical experiences later on. There was really a sense of us kind of moving upwards, so to speak, and feeling more connected to the upper realms and to information that was a little bit higher and higher perspective. It was really beautiful. And it really made me curious and kind of wonder, how in the world did everybody's August go? And one of the things that I really appreciated about the records is they gave this very encouraging message where it said, just stay open to how this information comes through this month, because for some of you, it might come through differently than you might expect from hearing this message. And so just stay open to like, how is information coming through for you? What is coming through with your spiritual connection? What's presenting itself to you this month? And then look at that through the lens of how might spirit be speaking to me based on what I'm seeing. What was so beautiful about that to me is oftentimes one of the things that limits our intuition and our spiritual relationship is we have a preconceived notion of how it's going to look and how information is going to come through. And so oftentimes when somebody says, I really want to grow my intuition and I really want to feel like I'm more intuitive, but I don't see myself as intuitive, or I feel like I'm missing something. A lot of times they have a preconceived notion of what intuition looks like, or they expect it to look like kind of like knowing about things before it happens, or like if you have intuition, somehow you're never surprised by life because you saw it coming before it happened. You know, that's not really my experience of it. There's some things if I'm intentional about and I find out like there's not evidence of it yet and it ends up like something happens where I'll say like, I felt like I had an intuitive hit that something was really off there. So I'm really not surprised that this happened. There's other things that, I do this work as a spiritual educator. I do this on this podcast. I do Akashic Records readings. I can bring through a lot of information for people. I feel safe saying that I have good intuition, and there's some stuff that like knocks my socks off. And I'm like, I never saw that coming because I wasn't looking for it. None of us knows everything. Intuition does not mean that you're all knowing. I believe that's God or higher power that we're talking about with that. Intuition just means that we are tuning into our other senses, our other ways of perceiving, our sensory experiences, we are open to receiving information in nonlinear ways and perhaps in ways that might be more experiential and come through with a sense of knowing or a sense of receiving an image or a picture or an impression about it, something we feel in our body. Intuition just means that we are open to those lines of information and we are open to growing our intuitive knowing. And when we hone and focus our intuition, many of us might realize that we have specific gifts with it and that we are very gifted with having a sense of intuitive knowing because we might have a sense of clairvoyance, where we might have images that represent a situation to us. I am a good example of this. Long before I really even knew what any of that was, I would often have this uncanny ability to speak with somebody and they'd say, oh, this is going on in my life. And I would say, oh gosh, when you say that, it just brings to mind a picture of, and maybe I'd give some metaphor. It's like you're writing a book and you got 3/4 of the way through, but you can't figure out the ending and you've been really stuck on which way it's going to go. And I can, in the picture in my mind, I can tell, like, just take a break. It's not time to write the end yet. And maybe they'll be like, oh my gosh, that's exactly how I've been feeling. And I keep expecting myself to know how it's going to end, but gosh, I think you're right. I just need to step away from it and be at peace with where I'm at in life and let my life story unfold. Like it would be things like that that would make me this like very spot on friend. Sometimes that came through in my work as a therapist when I was younger and I didn't know what I was accessing. And now I recognize that was the sense of intuitive knowing and having intuitive images come through that represented energetically where somebody was at. And sometimes in communicating that energy to them and communicating that image, it would help them see their path with a little bit more clarity and understand the energy of what they were experiencing better. And they felt very seen. That was me having intuition. And the more I worked on that gift, now I can be intentional with it. And oftentimes, if I am working with the Akashic Records and let's say I'm doing a reading or channeling some collective energy and something feels confusing to me, I will say, can you give me an image on that to the records? I actually did that today with what I'm going to bring through for the podcast at the end of this, which is what's to come for the end of the year. The energy felt a little confusing to me. And so I said, I need a picture to help anchor myself into. And sure enough, a picture showed up in my mind and that helped me interpret what I was sensing from the records. So that is me taking a raw intuitive gift and honing it in order to support my spiritual work. But my exhortation for anybody listening to this is if you have already done that work and you're really in touch with what your gifts are, that's amazing. Like keep on keeping on and growing them. And, if you're in a position where you coach or mentor or helping others, like thank you for the work that you do. It's very important and valuable work. And if you are stepping into your intuitive gifts and it's something that you're trying to grow, then I just offer you the encouragement to don't limit yourself, stay open to how it's showing up. Oftentimes when we get out of the way of ourselves is when we realize like we already are intuitive. The raw ingredients are already there and we can grow them with intentionality when we better understand how intuition is showing up. All right, September, grounded action, strategic steps. That was the energy for last month. It was very similar to February's energy, actually, of puzzle pieces in place. And last month felt like things coming together again, taking tangible steps on the path, like some headway might have been made. Feels like maybe some people, maybe you launched something, maybe you made a decision, maybe you just set some goals and felt like you followed through with those. It felt like a really grounded, practical month. And when I take a step back and look at all of these messages put together for the year 2023 and the evolution of the light, what I see is expansions followed by contractions that have been happening throughout the last year. That's really what I saw when I sat down and tracked these messages. It wasn't just how much wisdom has come through to support us each month, wisdom that I personally feel is applicable like anytime. It doesn't have to be the message for the month to read the message and get something out of it, because the record's wisdom is transcendent. It is applicable to more than just this space and time. This is what I love about them, but really trying to look at what is the pattern I see this year. I saw contractions followed by expansions, followed by a contraction. And this is how growth happens. When we expand on our journey, it's often followed by a season of contracting and being a little bit more grounded. We see this in the seasons. Summer is followed by fall into winter. That's a contraction in nature, so nature can reset itself, alchemize and recycle all the stuff that's fallen away from last season. A lot of that gets returned to the ground and it fertilizes the ground for what's going to grow in the spring. And then that helps produce and grow new flowers, new seeds, new buds, new trees. We can see this principle in the world around us, and we can see it on our human journeys. Oftentimes, if we sit down and track our development and just kind of track our own seasons and cycles in life, we'll see that like we might have grand visions and big ideas and a lot of things going on at once. And then it's often followed by some form of a contraction or feeling like life is a little bit more still. Or maybe sometimes we might feel a little bit kind of low or flat after we've been really expansive. This is one of my issues with growth mindset, which I think is great overall. I've talked about this before with positive psychology and coaching and growth mindset, that I think it's beautiful to have a growth mindset and to always want to grow through our circumstances and grow ourselves forward. But I also think it's really important to remember that there's times that we're probably not growing. We are releasing, we're letting something like die off or fall away from us. There's times that we might feel we're going through a dark night of the soul or a space of confusion or a time of chaos and disarray in our life, and we feel like we're going backwards. We are still growing ourselves forward when we go through those times, but we have to understand growth in a greater context of knowing that in order to evolve the light, in order to evolve ourselves, we need those contraction periods to integrate, to return to the core of who we are. We need to get lost for a little while in order to re-find ourselves. A lot of value happens in those seasons of being a little bit more quieter and a little bit more insular. So remembering that growth isn't linear. It is really about we expand and contract and journey over places that we didn't expect ourselves to go and spiral back around to where we just found ourselves. And maybe we think we're retracing our steps, except we are not giving ourselves credit for how much we've learned and how much we have grown. And I really think that probably encapsulates a lot of what many of us have experienced this year. That no matter where we find ourselves in December, we still have a little bit of a ways before we get there. But whether we think that, my goodness, I am so different than who I was when the year began, or whether maybe we feel like I'm a little bit different, but I don't really feel like things change that much. I think if we can look at our growth and really take the time to just inventory what have we learned this year? What has changed? How have you maybe renegotiated boundaries in your relationships? The record said last month in September that many of us would realize that our boundaries have been shifting over the last year. And that was boundaries for anything and relationships, energy boundaries, personal boundaries. You can play with that concept and think about, how have my ideas around boundaries and limitations, how has that changed? And the record said for many of us, they've expanded, that we have a bigger sense of self, a bigger permission to move ourselves forward in our lives, to take up more space. Sometimes we take up more space by having stronger boundaries in relationships or stronger boundaries in our life where we've had to say no or cut off things that weren't healthy for us and we're taking up too much space. So doing some inventory around how has that evolved and shifted. So much of our evolution doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in a way that we just wake up one day and we're these transformed creatures. Oftentimes it happens in these little inches and increments, and then these giant leaps, and then it's still for a while. And then we look back 6 months or a year later and realized, oh my gosh, I have become a different person than how I understood myself. And it happened right before my eyes. And I could sort of pinpoint when it was going on, but I guess I changed more than I knew. So it's valuable to give inventory to things and to take space for that. The message for October was called Shifts in Perception and Direction. And as we move into the last quarter of 2023, it's lining up to be an interesting end of the year. This month, October, that we're moving into, it's the beginning of eclipse season. And I'd forgotten that the eclipses began in the middle of the month when I did the message. So once again, I wasn't tuned into the astrology, but I could feel this was a month of like big movement and big shifts taking place. And then when I realized astrologically that it was eclipse season, I was like, oh, of course, eclipses usually signify big shifts and things really being shaken up and going through big releases and big changes. So we might find this month, some of us might find that we go in a different direction entirely, or something happens in our life that is kind of a surprise. Now we're going this way. Or we might feel called to make a U-turn and to loop back and to revisit something that we didn't expect. For some of us, it might just come through as a big shift in perception, where something we have been looking at for a long time, all of a sudden we see it differently. And it's like something sparks in our mind and we have that moment of revelation or epiphany or breakthrough. The record said that this month there was a lot of room for gratitude and just having a gratitude practice and really being tuned into what are we grateful for? What are we appreciative for? For looking for the gifts that are right before our eyes and just seeing how those might be showing up in the everyday. Ultimately, as much as I love looking at spiritual information, and as much as I can just like geek out talking about the Akashic Records, like I love this topic, as much as I love that higher information, we are here on a human journey as a soul. And so much of what gives us like a sense of giftedness and appreciation in this life is going to be found like on the earth. It's going to be found in our day-to-day life. It's going to be found in the small gifts that life presents to us on a daily basis. It's going to be found in a really good like mug of tea in the morning and seeing the morning sunrise, or a beautiful journaling practice, and you discover something new about yourself just through writing about something going on in your life. Or it's going to be stepping outside and seeing the moonlight on a chilly October night, or having a moment of gratitude for whatever represents home to you or sanctuary or the people that you love. Those are the things that make life meaningful. And those are the things that give us a sense of giftedness. All right. Before I wrap this up today, I want to just do a sneak preview of what's to come. The end of 2023, I got the sense of this was not my favorite image, but I'll bring it through. It was being squeezed out of a birth canal, and almost like we're holding a collective breath and we're about to be reborn again. And that's actually when I said to the records, could I get a different image? Just something that helps me better understand this information. And then I saw like all of us like in this like big slingshot. Like obviously this is a little bit of a comical metaphor, but almost like being slingshotted into this like new way of being. And so I very much feel that the end of the year kind of holds some pieces to this idea of evolving and this idea of growing into a new state of being, and kind of moving us to what the record said, that we would end the year in a different place than where we began. So I feel like 2023 still has some surprises up its sleeve. I feel like there is a lot of energy that's going to be coming our way October, November, into December. I look forward to how that breaks down with the monthly messages. But overall, what I feel is this sense of continued evolution. And it's almost like we really have moved into a new space, and like the final touches are being put in place in the sense of whatever needs to happen in order to bring us throughout whatever the rest of the cycle looks like for 2023. So one of the things that the records also said that might feel helpful for us is understanding right now that this evolution of the light, we're all under the same umbrellas, but we are all on our own soul journey, and not everybody is moving at the same rate. And I think we're going to continue to have a sense of almost like having these like trans-dimensional realities happening right now, where even though we're embodying the same planet, that sometimes our sense of what is anchoring us and what feels real to us and where somebody else might be coming from in life, what almost feel like different realities. I hate to use the word like low vibration and high vibration. Maybe a better way to put it is I think we're going to continue to see people who are in a space of fear-based consciousness, and they are creating from that, and they are operating from that space. And we're going to see people who are perhaps trying to find a higher trajectory and create from a higher space, and create from a space of finding their resilience, of finding the light, of finding a better path forward for themselves, whatever that might look like for them. And so understanding that not everybody is coming at it from the same point of view, but being able to understand, is somebody creating from that space of fear, or are they creating from a space of love? Are they coming at it from a space of darkness and lack, and creating more chaos and drama? Or are they coming at it from a place of trying to be a contributor to the light? Again, that's not about perfection. It's just about intention and where we're trying to come at it from. And the last thing the record said, as we move towards the end of the year, is continue to think about the direction you want to go without necessarily attaching specifics to it. So whatever you're working on in your life right now, whether that is relationship healing, specific goals, manifesting something, if you can continue to think about what you want it to look like, and also surrender at the same time the exactness of it, and say, well, this is my best vision that I know to imagine, so I'm going to keep imagining that until I'm guided to do differently. But to also just release the exact how and surrender the plan, surrender the exactitude of how it has to look. That will serve you well in continuing to point your heart in the direction you want to go. All right. Well, that is our energy update for the for 2023, and just kind of checking in before the last quarter. As I said, love talking about this. So I will definitely be bringing more Akashic information through as we get closer to the end of the year and we're turning our attentions to 2024. But for now, we are still in 2023, and we are guided to find gratitude this month and to find the gifts. Coming up next week, we are continuing our Archetypes of the Tarot series. And we will be moving on to the card, the Hierophant, and talking about what is the Hierophant? What does that mean? The Hierophant's a teacher, among other things. And how can we learn to embody this archetype in our life, connect to our own teacher inside of ourselves, and find those energies and qualities inside of us? And then how might we already be accessing those and we didn't even know it? So we will continue our series on tarot next week. And until then, have a beautiful week and be well, be love, be you, and be magic.
You've been listening to Your Heart Magic with Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright. Tune in next week for a new episode to support and empower your light.